I apologize for quoting Frost there, but indeed I always felt like two paths were diverging in a wood. One path was the one where I had a good job with money coming in, the safe choice, and the other was this nagging feeling that I should make something myself. Not for the money, though that would be nice, for the feeling of creating something that mattered at all. My materialistic ex-wife left me when I resigned from my job to pursue my dream, and now she's struggling, without a stable home, and asking me for a job after her wealthy husband left her. I'm Mark, and I'm 41 now, but this story begins a few years ago. I was a software engineer, and people thought I had it made, at least on paper. What most of those people didn't fully understand, though, was the feeling of being on a treadmill that never stopped going. And when I think back on it, I guess I started to feel the need to do something different. I had this core belief that I needed to have a stake in what I was doing, and it was difficult to explain that I wasn't unhappy exactly. My ex-wife, Sarah, liked the taste of the life we had together. It wasn't bad, it was very comfortable, but I just needed something different. We had been married for 6 years when I decided to quit my well-paying job, and it began with quiet conversations. Or at least I tried to keep them quiet. It was like eating bland food every day to stay alive, but you never really taste anything. This had been going on for so many years. I told Sarah, my wife at the time, about this idea I had for an app I wanted to create because I thought it would truly help people make a difference. She would listen, and I could almost hear the doubt in her eyes before she even asked the questions. But what about the lifestyle, Mark? What if it doesn't work? Are you sure you want to give up this security? They were fair questions, and I didn't have all the answers, but I knew I couldn't continue living the way I was. I tried to reassure her by telling her that I had saved up enough money to cover my half of the expenses so she could manage her share. However, Sarah was not enthusiastic and was worried about the impact on our family's finances. Sarah would point out all the practical issues and the reasons why it was a risky, even unwise idea. I understand that now I had a good salary and a nice life. Giving that up seemed irrational to most. At the time, I only had a vague plan. Based on the image we created, it was obvious that we couldn't maintain that kind of lifestyle without my steady income. Sarah only bought clothing and accessories from the best brands, and we were part of this exclusive country club where she socialized with influential people. The funny thing is that, even with a good salary, I was never really attached to that way of life before Sarah. I was willing to give up the luxuries to pursue my true ambition, but she wasn't interested in making any kind of compromise. I even proposed to sell some of her designer handbags to help finance the startup. She looked at me as if I had suggested that we live in a cardboard box. "Those are investments, Mark," she said in a tight voice, "and they're worth more now than when I bought them." I guess my suggestion to sell those bags had been poorly received. It wasn't really about the money from the bags. Rather, it was a sign of our teamwork. Sarah's idea was that I should work on my project in my spare time. Once it began to show, promise, I could leave. The company I worked for was very competitive, and I was easily putting in 10 to 12 hours a day. After that kind of mental strain, it was nearly impossible to focus on anything else. I waited for 2 more years, weighed down by my uncertainties and her constant doubts. Before one Tuesday morning, I simply quit with a simple resignation email. Sarah was furious, but this time, I felt a certainty I hadn't felt before. Sarah tried to be the supportive spouse at first, perhaps thinking she could still benefit from my potential success. There were encouraging words, occasional pats on the back, and even a few "I believe in you" moments. But as the months went by and the money wasn't coming in, that support started to fade. I stopped going to social events and traveling just to cover my share of the bills before I had a rough outline of what I wanted to build, and that was enough for me. She even began to say things like, "Okay, Mark, 6 months. If it's not working by then, get another job." I disregarded her timeline because I felt like I was headed in the right direction, and even if it took longer than anticipated, I was willing to wait because we weren't in danger of financial ruin. I had enough money saved to live comfortably for at least 5 years. With the house and car mortgages paid off, my credit card clear, and only regular expenses like food and utilities. Sarah also had her job, so she could easily cover her expenses. Her biggest concern was not that her income was less than half of what I used to make, perhaps even less for necessities, but rather the loss of the lavish lifestyle I had given her. We used to travel first class, spend weeks in luxurious Caribbean resorts, and eat at fine restaurants simply because we had the money. Sarah had loved every moment of it, never having to check prices, because as long as I was employed, money wasn't a problem. I suggested canceling our club and hotel memberships, but she renewed them anyway because she was too embarrassed to cut back on our lifestyle. She continued to live it, but this time at her expense, and she wasn't happy about it. The argument began subtly with sarcastic remarks about how I had all the spare time in the world while she had to shoulder the responsibility. No one had asked her to do that, and she was doing it to maintain appearances. But the annoyance increased and the tension developed. One Friday night, she wanted me to accompany her to a social gathering, but I refused. When she came back and discovered that I was still working late, she snapped, saying, "I didn't sign up to be the only one bringing in money. You said this would be temporary." That was the first major argument, and things only got worse from there. She would complain that we had to cancel our annual ski trip to Switzerland, and that she couldn't shop the way she used to. I tried to stay focused and keep moving forward to block out the negativity, but Sarah was making it difficult. Her arguments became more personal, and she began subtly undermining me in front of our friends. "Do you want me to go from Prada to thrift stores?" she would ask. For every bill we split, if I suggested cutting back on non-essential spending, she would roll her eyes. "Maybe if you had a paycheck, we wouldn't have to." One day, she came to me upset after initially making small jokes about how I was considering my options while she was working extra hours. One of our friends at the country club had inquired as to whether I was between jobs, and Sarah was embarrassed. "You can imagine how uncomfortable that is," she said. "Everyone thinks you're not doing anything." I was upset with myself for ever caring what those people thought. On some nights, she wouldn't even come home, claiming she had to work late. When she did, she hardly acknowledged me. One evening, after another of Sarah's late nights at work, I tried to talk to her and asked her gently if everything was okay. She replied, "I'm tired, Mark. That's what happens when you're the only one working." "I'm working too," I said, my voice rising slightly. "Just because I'm not getting a paycheck doesn't mean I'm not working," she said with heavy sarcasm. "Working on your dream? How's that dream paying the bills, Mark?" "It will." We were invited to a large, pricey New Year's party, and I had a meeting with a potential investor the following week, so I suggested we go to a smaller gathering. I insisted that it just takes time, and she scoffed, "That's all you seem to have these days." I stood there feeling smaller than ever, realizing that she wasn't willing to help me through this difficult time, and that I would have to face it alone, but I was willing to make sacrifices for my goals. She said she was going to the big party. With or without me, I said, "Okay, you go." This conversation took place before Christmas, and we didn't talk at all. On Christmas Day, she wasn't even at home. Instead, she simply left a note stating that she would be at my aunt's on New Year's Eve. She got ready and left in the afternoon. By around 9 or 10 p.m., I began to feel isolated and bad for leaving her alone over the holidays, so I got dressed and drove to the party. I tried calling her on the way, but her phone was off, or perhaps there was no signal. Luckily, I had the party invitation in my email, so I was able to get in, but the place was packed, and it was difficult to find her. In the crowd, I was determined to find her before midnight and give her a New Year's hug, but the scene was different than I had anticipated. She was with a man she introduced as a friend, but I could tell there was more to him. The person stopped me and said he was leaving, so I should stay with Sarah. She didn't seem happy that I had come to find her, so I asked if there were other friends there as well, and she said no, so she left all of our friends and family to spend New Year's Eve alone. I wasn't naive enough to think it was a coincidence when the person reappeared at midnight to wish her happiness. She felt uncomfortable seeing me and made some excuse about how they were alone, bumped into each other, and ended up spending the evening together. When we got home, I confronted her right away. She didn't even try to deny it. Instead, she responded, "What if I am? I am entitled to make my own decisions just like you do." She had been seeing that man for months and was waiting for an opportunity to tell me that. It hurt more than anything. I wasn't even angry. I was just empty. Happy New Year. The marriage ended before I knew it. I told her, "You're right. You are entitled to choose, and you've clearly made your choice, so let's stop pretending and end this." She was offended that I had said that, and she responded, "You don't get to say that. I'm going to leave you." She continued by saying that this person was much more successful and stable than I would ever be, and that she had moved on emotionally and physically. She stayed with me as long as I was able to support her, and now that I couldn't, she had the right to move on to a better partner. I filed for divorce and she accepted it easily. She moved out within a week, with no arguments or tears, just a calm acceptance that we divided the assets without much conflict. She stated that she didn't want to be unfaithful, but that my life choices had forced her to find a different partner because she didn't believe she should stay with someone struggling to find direction. It was extremely painful to be left behind when I was at my lowest, but after a week of initial heartache, I felt a sense of relief after cutting the tie completely because it was much better than living with a broken one every day. I immersed myself in my work, focused and determined, and 6 years later my business is doing well, and I have everything I once wished for, a company I built myself. It's not massive, but it's something I can call my own. I'm with someone now who has better sense, stability, and kindness. We're not married yet, but who knows? Last week, Sarah texted me, "Hello, how are you?" as if nothing had happened. I didn't respond, and then she sent me another and another, but today, she sent me a lengthy one that seemed to be saying, "I'm ungrateful, and I should at least respond, because she helped me for a year while I was unemployed. She listed all the favors she had ever done for me, and now she expected me to acknowledge her as my ex-wife as if I had to respond. She didn't matter to me, so I never felt the need to want my success. However, after her demanding text, I do want to show her what she lost, especially by throwing back her words like the one she said when she left me. I told my girlfriend about it, and she said something that spoke to me. If this still affects you so much, perhaps you haven't moved on completely. Which made me wonder if I have or should just be unaffected by anything Sarah says or does because I'm feeling angry right now instead of indifferent. I haven't replied to her, and I don't plan to. I just wanted to share this and see if anyone else has had a similar experience. After a week of texts and long emails, my receptionist called me one day and said, "There's a woman named Sarah here to see you, but she doesn't have an appointment and says she doesn't need one. She was just a ghost from my past." I asked the receptionist to tell her that I wasn't in today and that I wasn't going to entertain whatever story she had because I knew it would be a difficult one. After all, if she had been living the perfect life she left me for, she wouldn't be here. Even so, she left after receiving the message, and the following day she returned. I had told my receptionist that if she showed up again, she should inform her that I was on a business trip and wouldn't be returning anytime soon. I thought it was over when she did the same, and Sarah left. But 10 days later, she returned, this time at the front desk before anyone else showed up. I went into the office and saw her waiting in the lobby. She tried to follow me, but the front desk stopped her, telling her that I was busy and wouldn't be seeing any visitors. She told them she wasn't going anywhere without meeting me, even if it meant waiting there all day. When I heard this, I asked the security guard to let her sit. I don't even have a word for it. It wasn't satisfying, not really. It was just strange. I thought maybe the discomfort of sitting there all day would eventually get to her, but she didn't budge. The receptionist, a kind young woman who used to be so dismissive and who once made fun of me for not being successful enough, had that same entitled stubbornness and the same conviction that she could control how things went. She came to my office and said, "Miss Sarah is getting quite upset." She told me, "Well, she's your wife." I laughed a little and told her, "She's not my wife, Amy. She's just a wandering ghost from a past life. Please, just ignore it." Later in the afternoon, I had to go out to get some files from the printer. Down the hall, and as I passed the reception area, Sarah jumped up and approached. She said loudly, "Why won't they let me in? Don't they know who I am?" I stopped and stared at her. She deflated a little when I told her, "No, Sarah, you're not my wife, and no one here needs to know who you are." Her voice softened, almost begging, and she asked, "Can we have a private conversation for a few minutes?" I hesitated, but after 5 minutes, she followed me into my office, her eyes darting around, taking in the framed pictures of my team and a discreet one of me and my girlfriend Lisa hiking. She reached out as if to embrace me, but I stepped back and said, "Don't. I was your wife, Mark, and I deserve some respect." I was tired after a long day, and I didn't have the energy for this situation, so I said in a quiet but firm voice, "I'm tired. Just get to the point. What do you want?" She flinched, obviously stung, and then whispered, "I messed up, Mark. I messed up. That's pretty obvious." She told me the whole predictable story of how Richard, the man she left me for, was a spoiled rich kid living off his father's money. He showered Sarah with gifts, trips, and everything. That's why you're here, isn't it? Let me guess. The far more successful man turned out to be not so successful after all. She quit her job thinking she'd never have to work again, got married, and traveled the world living the high life. But Richard refused to step up. He didn't help his father's business. Instead, he spent the money. His older brother, who was running the business with their father, was furious with Richard, and eventually, the father gave the older son the entire business and all the properties. As a kind of pity inheritance, Richard received a small house and a failing factory, but he was unable to manage it, and it went bankrupt within a few years. He became mean and harsh after the money dried up, and one day, he just left Sarah. I asked her, my voice still impassive, "I still don't understand what you want from me. Why are you here?" She looked at me with disbelief in her eyes, as if she couldn't understand my lack of reaction to her. She found out that the house was mortgaged, and the bank was going to seize it because Richard couldn't make the payments. She went to her in-laws for help, but they refused, saying they had nothing to do with her or Richard. It was a surprising turn of events, to be sure, but I felt no shock or sympathy. She went on to say, "I resigned from my job because of him because I thought I'd never have to work again. Now that I need to support myself, the problem is that I've been out of the industry for years, and technology has changed so much that I don't know how to catch up. I don't have the money for training, but you know me, Mark. You know what I'm capable of." I interrupted her. "Are you asking me to hire you?" She nodded, and I couldn't believe the boldness. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I know, I don't. I'm sorry, Sarah, but I don't run a charity," she begged. "I don't even have a decent place to live. I'm sharing a tiny apartment with a stranger I met online. I've sold most of my possessions just to stay afloat. I have no savings left. I'm eating inexpensive food." But her voice was choked with tears. Please, Mark, give me a chance. I laughed. You undermined me when I was trying to build something for myself, she said. I don't even own a car anymore. I had to sell it to pay the rent. I never thought I'd get into this predicament, and I know it's all my fault. I was foolish. I realized that I was blinded by wealth and security. But look at you, Mark. You succeeded, and I'm so proud of you. Leaving you was the biggest mistake of my life, and I regret everything I did to you. She said all of this with a desperate look, as if somehow this would change my mind. I cut her off, firmly telling her to stop with the emotional tactics. I made it obvious that she was in the wrong place and that she would not be getting any help from me. There would be no job and no support. She tried to grab my hand, but I quickly pulled away from her. The touch was uncomfortable, and even the thought of it made her voice hardly audible. I was afraid of what lay ahead. I made bad decisions, but now that we had something real, Mark, we couldn't, could we? We tried again. I shook my head. No, Sarah, we couldn't. And what we had wasn't real. It was a transaction. You were in love with a lifestyle I offered, not with me, and I'm afraid I can't continue this conversation because my girlfriend wouldn't approve, so please leave. The confusion that flickered across her face when she asked, "You have a girlfriend?" I couldn't help but smile a little, even though it wasn't necessary, but I reached for the framed picture of Lisa and me from a recent hike that was on my desk. Her engagement ring was visible on her finger, so I held it up to make sure. "Yes," I said in a calm and steady voice. "This is Lisa." She looked at the photo, her eyes wide. "But you never post pictures with her. Is she real?" she stammered. "I checked with our mutual acquaintances, and no one mentioned you having a girlfriend." "That's because," I explained, "Lisa doesn't need designer clothes and lavish parties to feel content. We value privacy and meaning in our lives. She doesn't need me to be wealthy to love me." Sarah remained silent throughout the entire conversation, tears streaming down her face. She looked truly heartbroken. Up until this point, she seemed to have held on to a glimmer of hope that she could win me back. Now that hope was gone. She wiped away a tear, then another, and whispered, "It's devastating. I thought I was making a better decision, but I threw away the best thing I've ever had. I think we're done here, Sarah," I said in a voice that even she should understand. She hesitated for a moment, as if she wanted to say something more, but she patiently listened. When I finished, she put her palm on mine and asked, "How do you feel?" I was taken aback by my response. I wasn't angry, happy, or even sad. In theory, this should have been a resolution, but I didn't feel happy at Sarah's downfall. I felt nothing.